Hi, Greg. It's our full moon.
Good evening, Hugh.
It's 5:23 Thursday, our full moon video. I don't know what sun sign the moon is in tonight. I didn't look. Uh,
No, but isn't it there was a special name for the moon tonight. Was it flower moon or something like that?
oh, that figures.
Well, so we've had some good news this week and some bad news. Facebook's been messing with you. That's the bad news, taking down your pages multiple times and several of your groups and just completely removing your accounts because you're mentioning the same thing you've always mentioned about your murdered wives. But on the good side, this is probably the real reason that they're taking it down is you've received a little bit of attention from a couple of well-known celebrities. Bette Midler, for one, who's liked one of your posts, and another um, Cassandra Peterson and Bette Midler, to both of them this week liked your posts. So that's good. They understand that you're telling the truth, and I think that in itself is why Facebook has been messing with you extra hard this week. They take down all of your posts and then put them right back up. So
I
tell me how that's happening. Who's making them put it back?
I don't have a clue. I would think the FBI because I report murders or the police, but I think this
Yeah.
Tennessee is trying to hide those murders because they never filed murder charges. So they remove
Okay.
all my pages whenever I post about my murdered wives, and then they put them all back up. Cassandra Peterson is Elvira.
Yeah.
And
And that name Elvira, which I tend to think that that's her name. That name, that stage name, is marking the L of bottom line, just like
my sister-in-law was by
yeah, yeah.
Elvira,
Hmm.
and she came out when Vi, my sister-in-law, divorced my brother.
I think they did that after Elvis, which again marks the L of bottom line, I believe.
Family wrote the songs Elvis sang.
Right, because your family wrote
I
the
would, I
songs.
would meet with Bourne Publishing, his publisher in New York, at ASCAP publishing meetings.
And I think that's why the British in their attack against America attacked us with Elton John and Elon Musk for the same reasons.
Yeah, well, the King of England is Hitler's SS guard son, so he's a Nazi. And I don't care what anybody says. If a Nazi raises a kid, he's a Nazi.
Yeah, yeah.
That and George Bush, his father put Hitler in power in Germany before World War II. Hitler's goal was to restore the Pope across Europe. And gee, that's the Republican goal now, to get rid of the Constitution and Bill of Rights and replace it with the Bible from London. And we
I
we fought a revolution to throw King George and his Bible out of the country, and we have religious freedom. So they want to, after Bush in 9/11, calling America the homeland, which is a German term, a Nazi German term. Um, they want to restore the communist Pope and the London Bible with our Constitution, and we fought a
mhm.
revolution to throw that out. It makes no sense. Neither do the taxes, and they get. This is the only country on earth where they take all our taxes and give them to other countries and don't help us. You're aware of that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, they tax us to death, take our money. I said that in my last video the other day. Yeah, I think you were listening to the comments, but for some reason I always forget to look at the comments when I'm making a video by myself. But yeah, I was talking about that too. We're the only country on earth that just they completely rape us of our wealth, send it all overseas. No other country on earth does that.
Well,
Uh,
I find it just unbelievable that Americans keep electing senators. In this country, 2% of the population, 2% of the population are Jewish.
Right.
And I'm Jewish. And I don't attend a Jewish church, and I don't attend any church because I know they're all raping kids. And I won't help a church that's raping kids. All of them are doing this, and you know that as well as I do. But 2% of the population in America are Jewish, and over 80 to 90% of the senators have dual citizenship with Israel, and that's why all our tax dollars are going to Israel.
Right. And that has to be an orchestrated plan. These things aren't happening just
Oh,
by
it's
coincidence.
It's orchestrated.
Right.
And all
Right.
the rabbis in the fake Israel, if that was the real Israel, the Bible says that Israel shouldn't exist until God returns. That's why the new Israel is coming down from heaven. That's what the Bible says. If that were the real Israel coming down from heaven,
Mm-hmm.
all the rabbis wouldn't be from Turkey.
Yeah, in Revelation it talks, like I've mentioned on a bunch of videos, about the cubical Metatron's cube like structure that comes down from heaven, the New Jerusalem, and that's where God and the saints are supposed to live according to the book of Revelation. So that's really the New Jerusalem, not the one that we have currently.
Well, I taught science and I studied the human genome. And all the rabbis in Israel, 99.9% of them, are Turkish military men. And Turkey was Hitler's buddy.
Right.
So
And that's where the irony comes in, where we say, well, how is it that Nazis are running Israel? But that's how, because the Allies are actually the ones, and it's really common sense because, we see that Britain is, and the throne was Hitler's SS guard
and then there's
from Saxe-Coburg, and England owned the land where Israel is before the Balfour Declaration and before the state of Israel was created. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
this country calls Israel God's people. The Bible says thou shalt not murder. They just murdered 15,000 kids in Gaza in one afternoon.
Yeah.
Unarmed kids.
And they're near 50,000 now.
And I've seen all kinds of reports where the Israeli army were raping Gazian women, and then after the rape, they would shoot them, and they were all unarmed. I've read about 8,000 women being raped by Israel's army. So these are clearly not God's people. Even if they just raped one woman and shot her and murdered one baby, they're not God's people. And I
Yeah.
don't care what anybody says. I'm Jewish myself. My family moved here in the original colonies in the 1600s,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm Jewish. I don't live in Israel because I know it's phony. I know the Bible inside and out because I was raised to be a priest. I studied the Bible in 3 languages. I owned a ministry in the Bible Belt. And I know that the Israel of today, it was formed when Eisenhower and Truman murdered my uncle, Admiral Byrd. That's when they made it. After World War II.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they murdered my uncle, Admiral Byrd, because he confronted them about selling illegal guns, just like Noriega was doing. So they murdered him that afternoon, and I know this all my life because my mother was a Navy nurse. And he was her family.
And this arms sales that they're still doing, that's part of the drug sales, is definitely going on in Israel, and that has a lot to do with it.
I was kidnapped by Osborne, and Stone cut the bone out of my foot as torture on the day Kennedy was murdered. And that's Trump's election team, Osborne and Stone. And I'm George Washington's family. This is why Trump says he's greater than George Washington, because he knows his election team murdered my twin.
That was a very intentional statement. We realized that when he said it, didn't we?
When we were 4, we were kidnapped with Camille Sirhan out of kindergarten class. Long and Wallace and Darrell Hall and Osborne and Anderson and Andrews and Schultz raped us. They were beating us up for sex.
I've noticed in the news this week, since you've been exposing Darrell Hall, that his buddy Oates, was it John Oates? Is that his name, John? Anyway, Oates is distancing himself from Hall after 50 years in music with him. Now that you've been exposing Darrell Hall as a child rapist, Oates is trying to get away from him now, separating his.
Darrell Hall watched my twin get murdered and watched me get raped by men.
Yeah.
And so did L. Brooks Patterson. L. Brooks Patterson never solved the Oakland County child killings because he was receiving $25 million a year from the federal government to solve it. So he never solved it.
And it sounds to me like Oates got the message.
I don't know. I haven't a clue. But Betty White lived across the street from me as all this happened.
The Golden Girl? Betty White, the Golden Girl?
No, another Betty White.
Okay.
She was married to the guy that ran the Hazel Park racetrack, and that was the Preakness. And that's in the book, The Bottom Line. Kennedy's press secretary stole from me, my trademark.
Mm-hmm.
As he wrote a book called 7 Days in May about murdering the president.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things fit into my life, and 5 governors' families beating my twin to death and raping me. And they were all men. They were all gays. And now look at you have gays running all the churches. As the Republican Party wants to put the gays with the communist Pope as the law of the land. And it comes right from London, and the London King is Hitler's SS Guard son.
That's right.
These things don't even make sense.
It only makes sense when you put it in the light of what you just said, because if you use thinking like we were raised with in this country, most of us, one would think that because Trump is supporting so much the homosexual movement, that all the Christian churches should distance themselves. Instead, they're running closer to him as
Greg,
the more he supports the homosexuals, the more the Christian churches run to him.
On Facebook, I remove 100 gays a day pretending they're women, and they all support Trump, and they pretend they're women on Facebook. And you can find them because when you scroll down through all their posts for half an hour, their profile picture is a guy, or it says his profile. And then you really look into it and they're all gay. So the whole gay community is supporting Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking over all the churches. They just took over Southern Baptist Church. They took over the Methodist Church.
The Methodists are having a big problem right now, and it's known about here in our community. The homosexuals infiltrated it, got up to the highest ranks. First they were tolerated, then they worked their way up to the top of the denomination. Now they're in charge of all the money, and now they're kicking everybody else out that doesn't believe in it. And so a lot of the churches are just completely leaving the Methodist Church, and now they're just stuck with the people who are pro-homosexual.
Right. And the Baptist Church, the same thing's happening to them. And all of this comes from the communist Pope.
Mm-hmm.
The Pope is a communist. And he says, well, it's just another sin and you have to forgive it. But has he never read the Bible? It says homosexuality is an abomination right in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And supposedly that's God's inspired word. So why would a communist Pope say it's just another sin and you have to forgive it? Is it because all his priests raped children and murdered them?
There's an awful lot of money as soon as he starts accepting all them, and I think that's what he's really about.
He's the consul of churches, and the Baptists and the Methodists and the Protestants are all under his consul, and he's a communist. And the Republicans want to put a communist pope in charge of the law of the land in this country that comes from the London throne. King James was my cousin. He was a London king. And
And
anybody,
just as that king is knighting homosexuals to rape America through music and movies, I mean the Pope through this World Council of Churches is infiltrating the denominations here in America and through their homosexuals and bringing them through homosexuality into the Catholic Church
you know,
as he begins blessing their unions and so forth.
we need to stop talking about gays and homosexuality because Facebook is just going to remove this video.
Hmm.
The Methodist Church that married I and my wife, and they would come up for 12 years and hug my wife in her wheelchair and tell her how much they loved her. And it was all for show. I recently, this past year, contacted the pastor at the church, and I asked him why, when 4 of my wives and my children were murdered, did nobody in Greenville, Tennessee, or Johnson City, Tennessee, in the Methodist Church give me any help when I asked them for help? And my attorney, who went to the same Methodist church, was murdered the day after my wife was murdered. And my wife was dismembered, sodomized, and her throat was slit on Halloween Eve. And then I had another wife murdered by police who were hired as hitmen and bikers, and a guy named Shovel. And then Walters was trying to get me to burn his properties down in Greenville, Tennessee, and Johnson City. And I told him no.
Well,
and then his wife was my wife's advocate. And as my wife's ears were cut off and her throat was slit, they used her advocate's phones, Mrs. Walters from CBS, to scream at me Slater. And Slatery was the Attorney General of Tennessee. And then my wife's murders on the Manning Ranch were covered up by the Perrys. And the Perrys are my only living wife, her cousins. And that family buried Jimmy Hoffa under my horse. They stole my horse. They buried Hoffa under a goat and a horse, and they already had the hole dug. Her mother was with Jimmy Hoffa at the Sly Fox. And they tried to set me up by introducing me to Whitey. Whitey sold me a car, and the FBI detained me because I bought a car from Whitey that broke down half a mile from his home. And he was an outlaw motorcycle member. Mm-hmm. And that wife was the Renegades and the Outlaws. And they tried to murder me 3 times after they murdered Jimmy Hoffa. So I divorced her. It's real simple. I divorced her. Her mother, Perry Cook, when I was 17, they were in their 30s. Her mother was in her 50s, and they all tried to have sex with me as I married my wife, who was 12 years older than me.
right.
I was 17 years old. So I had 4 women in that family raping me. My own father told me to charge them all with rape. Mm-hmm. But because I had to divorce my first wife because she was sleeping with a homicide detective that was supposed to protect me, I didn't divorce her for that. I stayed with her for a year. She went and lived with him for 3 weeks and had sex with him every day. And then she come home and told me she was pregnant. And she gave that homicide detective's son my name.
So the Methodist minister that at that Methodist church you went to, he didn't seem to care anything about trying to help with this story. Turns out he was a military man, doesn't it?
He's a major in the Air Force. And he pulled me out of a park where Osborne, the family that kidnapped me and murdered my twin, the Tennessee Valley Authority put Osborne in charge of the park in the country store at the park, Kinzer Park,
Mm-hmm.
and they knew that Osborne murdered my twin.
I mean, that's an obvious FBI operation because I mean to put Osborne in
The,
charge of the park while you're there.
the major in the Air Force who ran the Methodist Church, he had to know that 9/11 was BS. He had to know that. He pulled me. I was in front of the whole town playing music from James Taylor, and nice music, not rock and roll. And he made me look bad in front of the entire Methodist Church because I was playing music for the town of Greenville.
Hmm.
I was playing piano and guitar and drums. And
Yeah, you'd think that he would want that as a minister.
then he married me and my wife as a major in the Air Force, running this church. And then 9/11 happened. And there are other things like my baby photos and Pratt cutting my father's hands off, and the Twin Towers were built on Pratt Street. And then the Methodist Church in California has Twin Towers. These things are not coincidences.
No, there's no way. Right.
Methodist Church is George Bush's church, and the Methodist Church and George Bush planned 9/11, and I don't think it, I know it.
Oh, clearly.
And
Oh, there's no question about that.
they murdered all those innocent people in Baghdad and then all over Iraq. They were innocent people. And the town of Greenville, the Bush family made Hitler's uniforms and parachutes. And Americans were dying from mustard gas. The Bush family made all of that for Hitler and employed the entire town of Greenville, Johnson City, Morristown. Bush employed all the Tennesseans in East Tennessee to make Hitler's uniforms while Americans died. He made Hitler's parachute, and then Americans put him in the White House. And then a major comes to me, marries my wife, and I ask him about why didn't the church, they all love my wife. Why didn't they help me? They all loved the attorney that was murdered. Why didn't they help him? And he was there in East Tennessee before I was. They put me on the Manning Ranch, set me up there, and then they murdered my wives. And not only did they murder my wives, they murdered my kids all over the country.
Yeah.
And a complete cover-up. No news, no obituaries, no funerals, nothing. And then when I asked the church why they did that, you know what they did, Greg?
Nothing.
Nothing. Nobody answered me. And I posted this in 100 places in the church newspaper online. They removed the church newspaper online.
Yeah, right after. Yeah, that was just 2 weeks ago or whatever. Yeah, you just did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they took down their website because you mentioned it on there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Unbelievable.
That doesn't show a lot of compassion, does it?
And now to be in that church, you have to join. And they won't allow me to join. So that whole town of Greenville and Johnson City are hiding the murders of my wives. And
right.
On the day they murdered my wives, the world got Chelsea and Manning. And Manning and Garrison made the JFK archives. And then in the Paradise Fire, they murdered the people that framed Oswald. And Judith Baker married into my family. I'm the Baker family. And just before they murdered my wives, the entire Baker family lived with me on the Manning farm. 11 adult Baker family members lived with me. So they completely hid the murders of my wives, 2 of them, and they were murdered by hitmen. as they gave the world Chelsea of Manning. And there's a whole lot more. Tom Garrett sent me FBI computers from the White House. He was Obama's White House press secretary. Sent me FBI computers with Clinton's emails on them. Somebody broke into my house and stole all the hard drives. He bought the computers back after I repaired them, and there was very minor damage to them. I put new hard drives in them, and then he destroyed my entire business as they murdered my attorney and my wife.
Yeah.
And that was Obama's White House. And I'm George Washington's family. President Jackson is my great-great-great-grandfather. I grew up with Hamilton, Grant,
Lincoln.
Morgan, Lincoln, all the people on U.S. money because they're my family. My mother's family was with Lincoln as his guest as Booth shot him, the actor. And they've covered me up with Hollywood. They covered me up with Katy Perry, the Duck Dynasty, and the Duck Dynasty was just taken to court for rape of minors. So they covered me up with people who rape minors. No news about my dismembered, murdered wives. And my wives were sodomized also. On the Manning Ranch, and Manning co-created the JF Archives with Garrison, my alumni. I was a teacher at 14. Garrison taught in my school system. And my friend Russell, who died sitting at one of my performances because he drank too much, his family put Manning and Garrison in charge of the Warren Report. So this is one great big cover-up of the murder of my wives to hide Kennedy's murderers. And
that's huge.
Oswald didn't kill Kennedy. The governors who murdered my twin did, with the FBI. The CIA had no part in murdering Kennedy. Why would the CIA murder a president who is in the Navy, who funds them and runs them? And then Hubert Hoover had hired my family, Marilyn Monroe, Miss Baker, to spy on John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. That's who wanted Kennedy dead. The FBI,
Pretty obvious.
the FBI director, Hoover. And then after they killed JFK and Hoover, the FBI murdered Marilyn Monroe. And they got 3 different stories. She took too many pills. She died on a bridge. And they tried to blame Bobby for killing her. And this was all BS coming from the FBI. And I don't think these things. I know these things. The FBI funded all of my schools, and they stole my entire life. The FBI stole my trademark, Bottom Line, with DuPont and McMahon in Austin. And my only living wife, her father worked at the Austin Steel Company that built the bridges all over the country. They provided the steel. And all the steel workers were Apache Indians, the renegades. And they murdered Hoffa and buried him under my horse and goat. And these things are true.
Right.
And then the FBI covers it all up. The FBI, if I call the FBI about my murdered wives, they hang up on me. And I have videos about this. If I call the FBI about kids transported across state lines and sold to gay bars, they hang up on me. If I call the FBI about kids murdered in Oakland County, they hang up on me. And I have witnesses to this.
Yeah, I know.
I made videos about it. I'll be quiet now. The only thing I have to say is Johnson City and Greenville, Tennessee are hiding the murders of my wives and children along with the Methodist Church that was run by a major in the Air Force as 9/11 happened. And that whole church all hugged my wife in a wheelchair. She had muscular dystrophy, but they don't help her when she's murdered. And she was dismembered and murdered. And the police wrote on a dismembered body, natural causes. The other wife was hung in her dog's leash half an hour after she told me she was being stalked by police again. So those two wives were murdered twice. They were murdered on the Manning Ranch. I found them dead, gave them CPR, revived them, put them in hospitals, Tusculum Hospital in Greenville and Johnson City, and they were murdered again. One was murdered on my birthday, July 4th. The other one was murdered on Halloween Day.
Mm-hmm.
No news about either murder in Greenville or Johnson City. No news, no obituaries, nothing. The nurses came crying to me because the girl that created the Head Start program for Reagan, Terry Heath, and her family was Brigadier General Heath, who protected New York for George Washington, my family. She was murdered by police. They kidnapped her and trashed her Head Start CPS office in Menominee, Wisconsin, and drove her across 5 state lines. She escaped them, called me, says, Hugh, you're the only guy I trust. Help. So I put her in Greenville, Tennessee, and then the police murdered her there. And they cover up these murders with CBS. And CBS is a Canadian broadcasting system. Oh, it goes back to the London throne, who's Hitler's SS guard once again.
Once again. Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I find the FBI's interference disturbing and astonishing, and that Kennedy knew about it. You were talking about how when you lived there at Kinser Park there in Tennessee before you moved in your house, how that Osborne came as a ministry, and then at the same time, another Osborne is made the owner, or not owner, but made in charge of running the campground while you're there at the same time. I mean, and these are the rapists with Hall and Anderson and Wallace and Long that
In
were
Oakland,
raping kids in Oakland County,
County,
Michigan.
Michigan. They were the Oakland County child killers.
Right,
Mel
right.
Brooks Patterson watched my twin get murdered and never filed a murder report.
And then we discover Osborne there is running Trump's campaign now. And I mean, you put all this together, and then you see, the brothers Osborne are the first open gays in country music, and you go, oh, well, who's running the sex crimes division of the FBI? Mike Osborne. And you just see this line of Osbornes, and you realize they're part of this homosexual attack on America.
All the Oakland County child killers.
Right. And they teamed up to rape you with Anderson, and then you find out that the FBI's Herbert Hoover was in love with Clyde Anderson Tolson, and just
same family that raped me.
Yeah.
And he was a Nazi.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they murdered my twin. And now they're working for Donald Trump to put him in the White House. And gee, my family wouldn't fund Donald Trump anymore because he borrowed $5 billion from my family's banks and never paid a penny back. He would just go straight to court and file bankruptcy, not pay money back on $5 billion at a time. So
Right.
Deutsche Bank in Germany funded him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the renegades, Apache Indians, with my first wife, or my second wife's family, who murdered Jimmy Hoffa, buried him under my horse and a goat 50 years ago. The FBI tried to arrest me for his murder, and he's my family member. I never murdered my own family. They tried to set me up with Whitey from the Outlaws. And then my wife was secretary to John Thomas, who runs the India movement, and they meet in Nazi Germany because they hate white people. So once again, it goes back to Nazis putting people like Bush in the White House. You got this.
Nazis working with Indians. It makes perfect
Now
sense.
we have Homeland Security, and that's a Nazi term. And then I'll add this. Epstein, Germany is a Nazi town in Germany. The Beatles came from Epstein. I think his name was Brian Epstein. And Barr put Jeffrey Epstein in a school system in Manhattan where he got the kids installed to the presidents and the Queen's kids in London, the SS Guard sons. And this is a big, London via the Nazi SS Guard, they're taking over this country. All your media is run by Beatles, Elton John, and even Giuliani was knighted by Hitler's SS Guard. And the New York mayor. And then when my bass player de Blasio died, a Russian mafia guy took his name de Blasio and became mayor after Giuliani left. And the Twin Towers were built on Pratt Street, and Pratt cut my father's hands off on the day I and my twin were kidnapped with Camille Sirhan. And then the Duncan kids were murdered with arsenic, and the FBI made all the schools make arsenic and old lace from Miller in London, once again, the SS Guard. Make arsenic and old lace a classic in the school system and required reading across all of America. And I'm the Christie family. Agatha Christie was really Miller.
Right.
From London. And I've known these things all my life.
Well, this is the reason why when you see Friday the 13th, the movie part 2, that Jason's mother says, I'm friends with the Christie family. And then Jason goes on to murder Victoria and Terry, very similar to how your wives Victoria and Terry were murdered in real life.
And then Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, all the kids had to lick, what were they?
Yeah, Wally Whoppers or something like that, or yeah.
And then when you look up the word in the dictionary, it's a male's genitalia. So all the kids in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory were licking a man's genitalia.
Right.
Right in the Willy Wonka Chocolate Factory movie.
Yep. These are the people that run Hollywood.
These things are disgusting, and it's all being done by the gays that Hoover brought here from after World War II. They brought all the Nazis here. Anything else to say, Greg?
Well, and then going back to Clyde Anderson Tolson and all that, who was Hoover's lover from the FBI. Well, then we see in the Matrix, we see Mr. Anderson and his, if you slow down the movie and pause it where he shows his driver's license, it says he was born on 9/11. And so you see that the Andersons and
my baby pictures, and I was put on an Indian reservation by an Indian chief who meets in Nazi Germany because they hate white men.
Well, even the name Anderson with an E, it was in anglicized to the O spelling, but in the Dutch and German there, it would have had an E in it, so Anderson with an E. That's the same heritage there that we're talking about. So I think Americans don't realize that there was a huge Nazi movement in this country before and even at the beginning of World War II. They didn't all just deport themselves or leave. They're all still here.
All the renegades and outlaws wear swastikas on their helmets and on their jackets.
Right.
So does Hell's Angels.
Yeah, and it was widely known when the Queen's son Harry was running around with supposedly it was supposed to be a Halloween costume where he dressed up like an SS guard. But now they try to tell you, oh, well, it was just the tabloids reported that, but that wasn't true. That was mainstream. I remember seeing it on the news when it came
That's his
out.
father's father, Hitler's SS guard.
That's because they were SS guards. That's right. And now they're trying to cover it up because they own the news and can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, all the news is run by London. Fox,
Right.
CNN is run by the BBC. ABC and CBS is Canadian Broadcasting Station. And then you and I make videos, and Rupert Murdoch copyrights our videos, and there's no music in this video.
Right.
And then he
Right.
stops our videos from being shown all over the globe.
Right. As they created on YouTube a fake account with a guy who looks like me and has a similar name, and yeah,
I'm a federal publisher, and I have a right to copyright anything, any work I do.
yeah,
So I copyrighted this right now.
yeah.
And if Rupert Murdoch tries to copyright this, I'm going to take him to court.
Yeah.
You understand that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A federal publishing, I have a federal government publishing license from Foley Court. And that's another thing. They told you Mr. Foley was beheaded after 9/11, making fun of stealing my trademark. They had the receipts.
Yeah.
Bottom Line Publishing Company in New York. And it was all over the globe, 267 countries. And they even stole my name and my IRS license. I had Jim Myers look into it, and they murdered him. Judith Wari Baker called me, told me her friend Jim Myers was murdered. They'd murdered him with dialysis. And there was nothing wrong with his kidneys when I asked them to look into my IRS license and write a book about it. You got this picture?
Oh yeah.
Judith Wari Baker called me crying on the phone. They murdered him.
Yeah.
So, and you know, I was poisoned at Rand Paul's house, and Rand Paul's great grandfather ran my business, Bottom Line, in New York.
Well, I mean, they did 9/11 to cover up the theft of Bottom Line, so it's not a surprise to me that they go through such extensive efforts to cover up everything you do. They even made that book about JFK Jr. with his face on there, and he looks just like you, wearing the same hat you're wearing right now. It's just unbelievable what they do.
Yeah, wearing my hat after they stole your book.
Right.
You wrote a book. It took you 7 years to write a book about me. They stole it. And now they've countered everything in your book. And JFK Jr. is wearing my hat
Yeah.
and claiming he's my life.
Right.
And he's not.
Not a bit. No.
No.
Unbelievable.
And then his mother, JFK's wife, went to honest this as I was being raped and my twin murdered.
Yeah.
And then the History Channel is run by aliens and UFOs. And when they murdered Admiral Byrd, they gave the world fake diaries about aliens and UFOs. And they've been hiding me behind aliens and UFOs for 70 years now.
Nonstop. Maybe one day we'll just make a video about all the ways they've used UFOs to cover you up, if we haven't already.
We do it right on the History Channel. That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier we were talking about how the L and Elvira and Elvis is L the bottom line, and then I was thinking about how Elton John, that's like if you buy a prostitute, you're a John, so then you have L. They're trying to say that you are on a John, basically, so they're basically saying two guys, and then Elton John is of course homosexual.
You have Elon Musk, and
yeah.
His mother took over the cover of Maybelline as my first wife was murdered Christmas Day. My wife and her sister were the cover of Maybelline.
Yeah.
30 years. And my family
Right.
Maybelline.
And so they're blending this name to try to make you look homosexual like they are.
Exactly.
As they take over all of our industry and bring our money back to the Nazi London
I'm
throne.
I dated women all my life. I don't date men.
Right. Right. A few of them rather famous women. We won't mention their names, but
All of them were famous.
mm,
One was the mayor of East Detroit. One was Joe Jacobs' stepdaughter of IBM.
well, yeah,
He gave my cousin Gates the software to make his first Microsoft computer at my wedding. The other one was Ricky Nelson's family. Mellon Banks. The other one created the Head Start program for President Reagan. And her
yeah,
ancestor was Brigadier General Heath, who protected New York from the British in 1775 through 1777.
right,
For my family, Washington.
right.
But I don't exist. And they cover up all these murders. They murdered 5 Duncan kids with arsenic as they murdered Kennedy.
Mhm.
Johnson called my family's home about 5 dead Duncan kids after he took office. That was to take the country's attention off of Kennedy.
Yeah.
And then Jack Ruby. I'm born July 4th. Ruby's my birthstone. He shot Oswald. And this is all about hiding my truth. All of it. Earlier you were talking about Elton John. Well, Elton John is another knight of the SS Guard in London.
That's right.
He's gay. I'm the L, I'm the bottom line. Even Johnny Cash called me the L. And he's my family. And I lived next door to John Nichols and Timothy McVeigh for 30 years. And they framed McVeigh for Oklahoma bombing in a Ryder truck. And my family, Mitch Ryder, wrote the songs Elvis sang in Vegas and in his movies.
Interesting.
None of this is a lie. And this is how they hid Kennedy's real killers with L. Brooks Patterson. And Towers, L. Brooks Patterson, Towers, who took my baby pictures with Eastman Kodak, and the sheriff in Macomb County, Hackle. They hid the Oakland County child killings, and the people killing the kids murdered the Kennedys. And police hid these things with Senator Graham. Graham owned Graham Media, complete blackout, just like in Greenville and Johnson City about my wife's murder. Complete blackout on Graham Media in Detroit about my twins' murder and my kidnap. Complete blackout. So I've been blacked out of all news for 70 years.
Yeah.
That's why we make these videos.
Mhm. Yeah. Before the internet, they wouldn't even allow you to write obituaries in the
We're
newspaper.
telling the truth of the history of the country, and nobody watches the video.
Yeah.
And they won't allow me on the news.
Right.
Tim McVeigh was my neighbor. He was buying drugs off the farm I bought from Trump's tax attorney, Mazar. Little kids were being overdosed in the driveway. Tim McVeigh was buying LSD from the drug dealers behind me. I stopped the drug trade. It turned out to be the Senate gun and drug trade. They gave the world Oliver North, put me in jail for a year, and they made movie stars out of all the drug dealers in Utica, Michigan. Sheriff Hackle did that, and as they put me in jail, they murdered my judge, Judge Hunter Stair. They murdered my doctor for my daughter, who had been kidnapped with a Kennedy child off her school bus at 7. They locked her in an earth mover where they were going to bury the Kennedy girl and my daughter at an excavation yard. And they murdered 2 judges, 3 of my attorneys, 2 doctors, and no news. They lied in the newspaper. They said the judges drank themselves to death, which was a complete lie. They said the doctor died of a heart attack after 5 minutes after I saw him, which was a complete lie. Another doctor died of a heart attack 5 minutes after I saw him. Complete lies. And the Detroit News put this in their paper, and the Detroit News helped DuPont and McMahon and Austin steal my trademark Bottom Line with the FBI. Webster was the FBI director. They stole my trademark. Webster put the word in his dictionary. It was never in the dictionary. I had hired Weiner and Associates on Telegraph Road across the street from where they murdered Hoffa, my family member. And he took my $300, went to New York, and they made it the bar booklet for all the lawyers in California to pass the bar exam. They made lounges all over the globe, Vietnam, Britain, New York, called the Bottom Line, and that's my stolen trademark. Weiner and Associates was supposed to protect it, but he was Clinton's buddy, and he was busy exposing himself online to minors, remember? And he went to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And he took my trademark and sold me out all over the globe. Weiner.
So right then you ended up with the Detroit News putting Bottom Line sections in their newspaper, and now you watch every news segment, every major news there is, and they all have Bottom Line segments,
right?
even though they're supposedly competing with each other.
All of that comes from Scripps Broadcasting, who owned the Detroit News, who originally stole my trademark when my lead singer, Danny Harold, was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
I was 14 years old.
Hill,
the FBI funded my school. Webster was funding my high school, and I was a teacher with Garrison. And Russell went to school with me, and his family appointed Manning and Garrison to head the Warren Commission. And then Russell came to one of my performances and drank himself to death sitting at a table with me in Madison Heights, Michigan. Recently, the FBI put all 15 policemen in Greenville in prison for selling drugs with bikers.
Mm-hmm.
And those bikers were running shovels around my house, and the police were using fake names and badge numbers at break-ins in my house. And they murdered my wife, Victoria, in her wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So the FBI, they put 15 policemen in Greenville, Tennessee in prison for selling drugs with bikers who built I lived on Blue Springs Parkway on a Civil War property. They built a clubhouse, the bikers, at the end of my street. And they used that clubhouse to murder my 2 wives.
And what that tells me is that the FBI is so organized that they keep they sell drugs to the policemen so that they can pull that card anytime they need to. So if the policemen are about to possibly take a murder case or something they don't want to expose, they can just put them all in jail.
I have FBI agents come to me in stores here where I live today. Mm-hmm. And they tell me how terrible Muslims are, and they needed to be murdered. And they were completely innocent on 9/11. America, Israel, and Britain stole my publishing license worldwide. And Bush told the military not to protect my federal publishing license. A federal publishing license from a federal court is protected by the military. Bush told them to stand down. There's no other answer to that.
Right.
As it was stolen. And it was stolen by Israel, America, and Great Britain. I own Beebe Street in Warren, Michigan, Beebe Street. I was a priest, a fisher of men. You have Beebe, Net, and Huey. Before that, Sharon Collins asked me to marry her twice. You had Sharon. Before that, I played with Jim Gold in the gallery, and you had Gold in My Ear. And Jim Gold in the gallery put songs out all over the country, bubblegum music. I played with his brother.
It's pretty clear England is working with the
Yep.
government of Israel and the FBI together on all this, right?
Right.
That they all run.
I'm heading in all news. And you know yourself, they've tried to murder me half a dozen times.
Well, October 6th in Israel, that was a replay of what they did on 9/11. They held back and I mean, you could get troops from anywhere in Israel to the other side of Israel on a helicopter in 15 minutes tops. I mean, things go 200 miles an hour. There's no way they didn't recall and stop the troops from preventing or intervening in that massacre there at the song festival on October 6th. They were just repeating the playbook, just like Cheney recalled the National Guard. So did they. I have no doubt about that. And I didn't even hear that they did, but I just have no doubt in my mind that they
the
did.
National Guard to my home. That's where I grew up, was at Selfridge Air National Guard. Chesterfield Township in Michigan. I grew up there. My inheritance came from there in New Baltimore. Fuller and Harris and Gardner. And then my whole family stole my inheritance. That's why I left Michigan. I left them all behind because they stole my inheritance. The Christie family, you got Governor Christie in New Jersey. His mother stole my inheritance with two of my mother's other sisters. My grandfather left everything to me before he died. They all stole it. My mother's sisters all stole it. My mother told me, I know my sisters and my firstborn son stole your inheritance. I'm going to leave you my inheritance. And she was dead an hour later. And I hadn't seen her. That was at my father's funeral. So I drove back to Tennessee after burying my father, and I had to turn around and go back and bury my mother because she told me she was going to leave me her inheritance. Somebody killed her to stop her from doing that. The only other person in the house with her lives in the home I bought from my parents.
Says a lot to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I left her at midnight and she was dead before I got 3 hours down the road. So she walked in the house, told them she was leaving her inheritance to me, and she was murdered. And then I never got my mother's inheritance after her sisters stole mine. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then my
Your inheritance stolen twice.
sisters tried to say they were there in the house, and they weren't. They weren't nowhere near. It was midnight, and they weren't there. My mother had me remove one of my sisters from her house because she said they were trying to kill her. She told me her and her husband are trying to kill me. So I went to her house and told her to leave my mother alone. She doesn't want you in her house anymore. I told them that right to their face. And then I moved to Tennessee. I moved to Tennessee because my own brother raped my wife in front of my kids.
And yeah, you wanted to get out of there. I get that.
And then I went back to ask L. Brooks Patterson why he never filed the Oakland County child killings. He wouldn't talk to me. And then he died a year later of cancer.
Yeah. Prostate cancer, I believe, or rectal cancer or something like that.
Office, they murdered 5 of my kids in my family in 2 states. And all of this is covered up in all news. and I'm the truth of the Oakland County child killings. And they murdered the girl protecting the kids. They were flying the kids. They would kidnap the kids and fly them off the Great Lakes in seaplanes to California and sell them in gay bars. And that's why you got Ruby Ridge. And the wrestler Valentino was given $250,000, and all he accomplished was killing an 11-year-old little boy and his mother at Ruby Ridge. And that happened in 81, not 91. The FBI changed the dates and even the state it happened in.
Yeah, they just created a whole nother event to copy it. Yeah, I get it.
I own Baker College, and now they spell Baker with 2 Ks instead of 1.
I don't think the college does, just Jimmy Baker.
Yeah, yeah, and this is all a cover up.
Yeah.
My daughter Tammy was born. They gave you Tammy Faye Baker, and this is before you were even born, Greg.
Yeah.
And Baker College is built on Hughes Street, and I'm Hugh. Huey helicopters. My cousin piloted the Enterprise in Vietnam with Huey helicopters, and this is because of my uncle, Admiral Byrd.
Oh, and Billy Graham's daughter married Jimmy Baker after Tammy Faye left him.
Oh, is that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Well, we should probably stop it there. Been right about an hour.
Yeah. You know, I'll send you the video, put it up on YouTube, and share it. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. Have a good night.